Hey everybody, it's Bust with our Expedition tier list for the 213 patch. A little slower than I was hoping to get it out there. There were quite a few changes in 211 to Expedition, kind of reworked almost all of the card pools in general. Then the 212 patch brought us Action and Viggio, and so, in between trying to get the site completely updated and then also moving, the tier list is what fell behind in my time availability. So, we did mention the site over at ftpbus.com. We'll squeeze over to it real quick. If you prefer to find things like the text version of the tier list, this is over here. So, if you want to say Control F and look for your particular card pool, you should be able to easily find it on the tier list. And then we're also trying to piece together these individual card pool expedition guides. This takes quite a bit of time to put together, but I've been doing that as we have time. And so if we just click on this Lee Sin guide, we can come over and find the specific card pools as they live with all of the cards in expedition. And then the 3-minute guides gives you a quick and easy thing to watch and see how to play that specific card pool, and then also a infographic for some of the particular champions build arounds, along with a video where we executed that pretty well. So I do keep this updated and maintained as the best I can, just ftpbust.com. But back over to the tier list. As we always like to start out with these, and the way we talk about these is we're looking at these deck archetypes as a full build around strategy. So we specifically call this out because we assume that you're going to try and draft 3 of one champion and 1 of another one, and then try and do whatever that champion does or whatever that specific deck archetype does. And so, in that sense, there are some champions and some card pools that don't play well as build arounds. The common one that we speak to is this Terrors from the Deep and Maokai, and then also Ancient Evil Maokai, which is Ancient Evil Thresh now. But it's not a particularly strong build around, but there are some card pools that really love to have this Maokai. He's strong in sea monsters. He gives blighted caretakers to Callistas. He gives removal spells to other decks. There's just lots of things that this Terrors from the Deep Maokai does, but it just doesn't work as a build around strategy. And so I don't have the time to piece together something as far as what are the best supporting archetypes in the game. I don't think the value is quite there for you to spend your time on either, so we stay away from that. But just keep in mind these are tiers for what you want to actually just be out here building around. And so in that vein, I think kind of the big thing that we're seeing here, and kind of the big change that Riot has put into the game, is we see some of these champions appearing multiple times. And so if we just move our ways down into tier 2, you can kind of see that Shyvana shows up 3 times. Down at the bottom of tier 2, Riven shows up 4 times. Misfortune is a tier 3 champion across all of her archetypes just because Bilgewater is so bad. But Misfortune, is an incredibly powerful champion, a ton of her out there in availability. And so, where this, is kind of coming from is at the beginning of Empires of the Ascended was the release of Challenger Jarvan. He's up here in tier 1 now. And like what we found to be like incredibly powerful archetypes was if you would just kind of ignore Shurima, if you just completely stayed away from Shurima, ideally, um, then you tried to be in this Demacia allegiance, you were basically able to like double your chances of finding the cards that you want, because Jarvan is heavily trying to use 2 elites. He wants to use Honored Lord, the 2-drop elite that gets barrier when he challenges, and then use the Umbrella Maker, the 1 mana 2/2 that puts the Challenger card in your hand if you behold an elite. And so, kind of the idea that we're like piecing together with this is, if Honored Lord shows up in Demacian Steel, then we kind of want to maximize our chances of seeing both the Challenger, Jarvan, and the Demacian Steel archetypes throughout the remainder of the draft. And it turns out to be quite strong. You just minimize the amount of Shurima that you have, so you maximize the number of Demacian Steel packs that you can also see. And so, what we tend to see are there's like typically very specific cards in each of these archetypes that you're looking for, and you want to maximize your chances of finding those specific cards. And so, with the Challenger, Jarvan, Demacian Steel, we mentioned Honored Lord. Down here with Riven, all 4 of her archetypes have both Blade Squire and Runeweaver in them. Then, if we go up and look at like the Shyvanas, There is the 2 cost unit that puts a dragon in your hand. There's the 3/2 challenger for 2 that appears in 2 of the 3. Then there's also the new 3 mana 2/4 that doubles up your furies. And so, sorry, I can't remember all those card names. I really struggle with that. But I think as the thing kind of stands is, say we're about to draft a pack. We're shown 3 options. We'll just say, for the sake of ease, we are in an allegiance to Demacia. And so there may be 15 Demacia archetypes that could show up. And so if we're, say, drafting Lux, only one of those archetypes could be Grand Moments Lux. And so the specific cards that we're looking for Lux aren't going to show up that commonly. But when it comes to Shyvana, Shyvana has 3 archetypes. So we could see, a specific Shyvana archetype show up 2 or 3 times, or even if it's just 1 time, we should be more likely to see it just because there is 1 out of 15 chance of seeing Lux, whereas there's a 3 out of 15 chance of seeing Shyvana. And ultimately, what this big aside amounts to is you should be able to assemble more consistent decks the more frequently these champions show up. So what we are kind of, in the end of the day, seeing here in Expedition are these champions that are heavily stacked, these champions that have tons of archetypes in the game, push themselves up to the top. And so this doesn't, apply to every archetype. Yes, there's 4 Misfortunes down in Tier 3. There's the singular Retribution Lucian up here in Tier 1. It doesn't apply to everything, but, as the cream rises to the top, the more these champions show up, the more likely they are to do that. And so I think that's something that we'll have to kind of see how it pans out here in the future. And kind of the result of that and the problem with that kind of shows itself with our kind of next point here. And you have to have some kind of way to have interactivity. The big problems that you can find yourself running into now are like, how do I deal with action? How do I deal with a Riven Sword? How do I deal with a Kyrian Sumpworker? And so what we used to see kind of like in the past, where you would have your aggro decks be like your elusives, and then elusives really kind of like got shut down by these interactive decks. And so if your deck was able to piece together, a bunch of Mystic Shots, then you could pretty easily handle the elusives. But then the Mystic Shot style deck tended to just be like a 1-for-1 removal style deck. Your kind of more classic control deck, and then that would just get annihilated by invokes. And so you had this kind of like circle of life, if you will, of how the kind of Expedition archetype metagame circle kind of worked. But what we're kind of seeing now is, can you deal with a 2/4? And so with the addition of all these Shyvanas, the new 2/4 Dragon Fury thing lives in her card pool. They brought back Laurent Protege, and then now there's also all of these Rivens running around as a 3/4. And so what we've kind of seen is that like a lot of these aggressive decks of past, just a classic, okay, I'm going to play a 1-drop on 1, 2 1-drops on 2, a 2 and a 1-drop on 3, just get completely shut down by a 4 health unit. And so there's just a big old bunch of 4 health units running down around, has really slowed down the format. And so the way that we kind of punch past those now are the more elusive style strategies. So your elusives, your Sumpworks decks, your fearsome style decks are the kind of king of aggro, if you will, right now. And then after that, you have your 4 health based units decks, whether that's your Rivens or your Shyvanas. And then beyond that, you have your slower invoke style decks. And so the thing that kind of like bridges them all together and is the thing that every deck has to be able to do now is interact. So if you want to be able to kind of stop these super aggressive elusives decks, you have to be able to kill an early game unit. It's not just Teemo now, right? And so a way to kill a Teemo, a way to kill a Green Glade Duo, a way to kill a Kyrie and Sumpworker is ultimately super important for any deck these days. And so that is kind of what gets us to the point where we're at with these card pools and this tier list here. We have the kind of ultra aggressive elusive style decks. That's what you're going to see with your Disciplined Zeds and your Shadows and Dusts. These are the best ways to say take advantage of a Green Glade Duo. The next step is, kind of our highly interactive mid-rangey decks. That's where you're going to see, hey, can I do something with like 4 health? That is where we have the Relic Tracker's action. And then down in tier 2, we have all of the ribbons. These decks, um, they're highly interactive. They can find vulnerables in the Shurima. They can find challengers in Noxus, and then back to the challenger Jarvan, Demacian Steel. They have the Honored Lords to come in and pick on these elusives, if you will, just the way to get in there and kind of interact with our opponent's stuff. And so then, as the cycle continues, on top of all of that, the Kindreds and the Malefic Descent style Slayers decks can come out here and prey on the slower Riven style decks, and then are things like our Invokes can really just be the top end of the curve. They struggle against the elusives, but can pick on these slower mid-rangey style decks. And so that was a kind of a big conglomerative rant of the current state of the format. But I think if you can kind of bucket yourselves into one of those three things, either elusives, a non-interactive aggro face deck as kind of point a interactive mid-rangey style deck as point B, and then a high value either Slayers or um, Invoke style deck as kind of point three. I think as the point of really high strength in this format, you'll find yourself in one of those three. And so to at least stop and individually talk about some of these, I don't think there's like too much change to this card pool as far as the ones kind of bubbling to the top. Akshan, of course, one of the new champions. I don't think he's the best champion in the game. I still think Zed holds that honor, but Akshan does absolutely everything you could ask out of a champion. He comes down, immediately generates value from the landmark. He's a 2/2 quick attacker for 2, which is a fantastic deal. He flips into a removal spell. It's just anything that you could want out of a champion, Akshan does. So he immediately found himself doing quite well. Biggio, on the flip side, is just one of the super powerful late game champions. I kind of liken him to Hecarim of the days of old, when there was only one set in the game, when there was kind of like the de facto best way to end the game as a Shadow Isles deck. That used to be Hecarim, now it's Biggio. He doesn't take a whole lot of work. He flips into a removal spell. He slows down the game by putting the additional units on the board. And then he's just easily, one of the biggest units in the game and the toughest to deal with. I've seen so many games to where it's just like, oh, Viggio's on the board for 3 turns. We'll never be bigger than this. And then he just, doesn't actually win the game for 5 more turns. But it's very clear the game's over at kind of one of these early game points. And so it was quite interesting that both the Akshan and the Biggio came out so strong right out of the gates. Both of their card pools are extremely tight-knit and extremely strong. I would expect them to be nerfed within the next couple of patches just due to their sheer strength. But both of these new additions are extremely strong. Continuing on up here at the top, the Challenger Jarvan and Demacian Steel Garen we talked about quite a bit. This is just a highly interactive mid-range deck that has extremely high amounts of consistency. And so Honored Lord, Umbrella Maker are extremely good here. These are, I think these are better than Dragons. I think the Elites are better as the kind of mid-rangey style good deck. As far as control decks go, the Slayers with Kindred or the Malefic Descent with Biggio are the current best control decks in the game. All of these are extremely strong. The only thing that kind of like sticks out here that we haven't talked about too much is up here in the top right corner is the Spellslinger's Lee Sin, which is kind of weird. Lee Sin is in this really weird spot to where he kind of like functions as a combo deck and really picks on a lot of the slower decks in the format. It's just a lot of decks have a real big problem with Lee Sin just kicking something away and doming you for 14. He tends to just be like a real OTK strategy. But I do concede that Lee Sin isn't able to interact with anything, but he's also, surprisingly enough, with his card pool, only has 4 cards in it, one of them being Sonic Wave and one of them being Claws of the Dragon. And so he's able to put together this like really super hyper aggressive Claws of the Dragon deck, and then also close things down with his Dragon Kick combo potential. And so Lee Sin's still able to hang up here. The worst version The Fist of the Dragon Lee Sin has fell down to tier 3. That one is still kind of bloaty and doesn't have a whole lot of direction, but the Spellslinger's Lee Sin still hanging out here at the top. Then, as we move down into tier 2, not a whole lot of change in here. Aurelian Soul still sticks around. This is one of the better control style decks. It doesn't have the strength of the interactivity that you get from a Kindred, so I don't think it's as good as in that sense, but there's no denying that you can't outvalue Invokes. So still lots of raw power there. Also combos extremely well with the dragons out of Shyvana, and so lots of great things we can still do with Aurelian Soul. We talked a lot about champion stacking. Shyvana can do all that. I would expect some like Shyvana nerfs incoming in the future. I at least personally, the way I feel is Shyvana should really be struggling in her late game, or I'm sorry, in the early game. And so, sure, dragons are big, huge fly things, and they should control the late game. That's fine. She has the early game interactivity in single combats, the late game interactivity, and concerted strikes. And so she needs some weakness to her. I think her card pools will end up getting bloated to where it's a little bit more challenging to stack up the early game cards. But we'll see how that plays out. With no nerfs, I still don't think she's as good as the again, like the elite style mid-rangey decks, but she's still quite strong. Otherwise in here, Tears from the Deep Maokai did make a huge resurgence from tier 5. Again, this is another one of these weird decks that doesn't interact that well, but the units in it are super strong. This used to be like really, really bloated before the 2.11 patch, but someone went in and cleaned out a lot of the bad cards out of this card pool. It's still pretty heavy in the number of cards, but there's no more Bayou Brunch and Tears from the Deep. And so it has become much, much stronger in that sense. Okay, and then at the end of tier 2, it is just this massive pile of Noxus champions. All these aggressive Noxus champions are what lives here. And this is mainly a function of the strength of the Reforge mechanic. With there being 4 Rivens running around, all of the Riven card pools have both Blade Squire at 1, Runeforger at 2. Just an incredibly powerful set of cards. So many side combos that you can get with the Reforges, so many games that you can close out against non-interactive decks with Riven Swords. It is just super, super easy to piece together any Noxus aggro deck and still have like 5 and 6 Reforged generators in there. And so all of these are extremely strong. The problem with these and why they can't all be tier 1 is a lot of these decks do get shut down by a 4 health unit. And so it's kind of tough to just steamroll a trial with one of these Noxus decks because you might run into dragons a couple times. But again, these are all extremely strong. I wouldn't expect too much out of them as far as an early game loss. I think you should be able to carry these pretty far. And then the last one in here, Time Lord's Echo. This is how you get together the Kyrie and Sumpworker deck. We've talked about these early game aggressive decks that just prey on things that can't interact. The Time Lord's Echo is, a pretty tight-knit pool. There's not a lot of cards in it. Has the Sumpworker in it, ways to copy it with iterative improvement, and then predicts to find more of your Sumpworkers. It's an incredibly powerful strategy if your opponent can't kill a unit. If you're scrolling down to tier 3, if you're playing Leona, you're going to have an extremely tough time beating a Kyrie and Sumpworker. And so, as we move down into tier 3, nothing pushed itself up into tier 3. The way that tends to happen is, some of the borderline tier 3, tier 4 cards kind of bubble up because something got pushed down into tier 5. Nothing really got pushed down into tier 5 today. And so we don't see anything coming back up. The big ones coming out of here are the Callistas and the Nocturnes. You can most certainly still get a 7 winner with these, but they used to generate so many high quality, really good decks that you had like so many options with these decks that and they were all good. And so what would typically happen was that you would like start out saying like, okay, I want to draft Mist Wraiths, and Mist Wraiths may not come together, but you could still backdoor into like Fearsomes. And then if Fearsomes didn't really come together, then you could still just put in like a Blighted Caretaker into your deck, and it'd be pretty, active in winning. But with the changes in this patch, they took the Mist Wraiths out of Afterlife. They did a whole lot of work to Retribution. Callista is just not nearly as strong as she used to be. There's not as many fearsomes running around in these card pools, and so as you move over into Nocturne, it's tougher for him to get the fearsomes deck together. There's not as many opportunities for the Black Mist to find other Mist Wraiths, and so the quality here just kind of really shot down. And then, kind of unfortunately for the likes of the Diana, as these Nocturne pools were kind of weakened, that also weakened the Nightfall card pools. And so the Nightfall decks used to be really strong on their own, just in the sense that they could overwhelm your opponent's decks. The early game plays in them were so strong, you could just kind of overwhelm all of your opponents. But nowadays, they can't answer a 4 health unit. And so, with so many ribbons and so many Larent proteges and the like running around, it's just too easy for these Diana decks to get blown up by a single unit. And then, as the rest of these go, we've talked quite a bit about interactivity today. Leona just can't do it. And so, again, you can most certainly 7-win a trial with a Leona deck. It's just you might run into, a Sumpworkers deck, or you might run into a Greenglade Duo deck, and you are historically extremely bad against those. And so, to kind of like compound itself with that, if Leona has to run into a Riven Sword, that's just another unit that she can't really deal with. And so again, you can get your 7 wins with all of these. I will concede that Callista, Nocturne, Leona, Diana, all of these champions can assemble in a 7-win deck. It's just you need to both have the draft go well for you, and so you need to be out there assembling that strong deck, and then you have to kind of like dodge your really bad matchups. And I think it's very easy to say in the current metagame that a lot of these matchups for these particular champions are particularly bad. So that would do it for Tier 3. As we move on down, not a whole lot of changes down at the bottom of the list. The only change in Tier 4 was the cycle that has happened here was we moved the Terrors from the Deep Nautilus out of Tier 5. Into Tier 5 came Soraka. Mending Touch Soraka is abysmally bad. Whatever you're supposed to be doing with that card pool, you tell me. It's just a bunch of healing cards, which never works out. It's just abysmally bad. So Soraka replaced what's his name, Nautilus, and then to fill the gap from Soraka, we pieced otherworldly creatures Trundle down into Tier 4. Freylord did get quite a negative a negative streak in the 2.11 patch. They took away a lot of the Avarosian Outriders. They took away a lot of the 4/5 regenerate overwhelm, and so the overwhelm decks from Freylord all just took kind of a beating. And so that used to be where Trundle kind of fit in. The ramp strategy with Trundle was never any good. The 8 mana Behold theme was never any good, but he was still a pretty high value champion to throw into an Overwhelms deck. Was quite good at that on his own. But now that that's not as much of a viable strategy, this Trundle has taken a bit of a beating, and so he's living down here in Tier 4 now. So not too much change down here at the bottom. Lots of changes up here at the top. So, that is going to do it for our tier list review today. Agree or disagree, let me know it out in the comments. I'd love to get that conversation going. And that is going to do it for us today. So, this is Bust, and we thank you for being here.